Before we get started, I would appreciate if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you. So I'm going to do this video just so you understand the value proposition of XRP and what the sort of problems XRP is actually solving in the market when it comes to cross-border payments. So this is the cross-border payment system that we're using today without ISO 20022 messaging standard. So it's a legacy system. And once you understand how it works today, and then you would understand, you will see the benefits that XRP can actually provide banks. So to help you appreciate it more, I guess, when you understand its utility in more detail. So this is how the banking system works today. If we have banks with direct relationships with each other. And what I mean by direct relationships with each other is that both banks have accounts with each other. So what actually happens is, imagine you have a bank in America, for example, Bank A, and a customer wants to send $1,000 over a cross-border payment to the UK, and that's Bank B, and that's going to be in pounds. So a company like Swift, which deals with sending bank messages over from one bank to another, uses the messaging system we use today is called FinMT. So what would Swift do? It would basically send a direct message, because these banks both have a direct relationship with each other, from Bank A to Bank B. And no actual money is actually sent. So people may actually think, oh, money is actually traveling from America to the UK, but that doesn't actually happen. So the only thing that is sent is a message. And the message that is sent from Bank A instructs Bank B, and is sent via Swift, what to do. So it basically says credit an account and debit an account. It's a credit debit message instruction. So what usually happens is how they actually do this without actually sending any money over is that Bank A has a pre-funded account already with Bank B in pounds, and this is known as nostro vostro. So when I say the term nostro vostro, it basically means a pre-funded account held for a bank by another bank. So Bank A would have an account with Bank B, and it's pre-funded with British pounds, and that account is held in Bank B in the UK but belongs to the bank in the USA. So what the message basically does, when it's sent over from Bank A to Bank B, the message basically tells Bank B to credit the customer with whatever the transfer is once they do the exchange rate. So imagine $1,000 is sent over to, and it's equal to £800, for example. So the message will say, credit the recipient with £800, and they debit the account of Bank A that is held with Bank B. So Bank B just takes out £800 from the account of the American bank that's held in the UK bank, and they give it to the customer, and that's been debited, that's been credited to the customer, and it's been debited on the system as well. That £800 was taken from Bank A's account, and that is all done via a message. So no money actually gets transferred, just a Swift message instructing the banks to credit or debit an account. And this can only be done because it's important that Bank A already has a pre-funded account with Bank B. So there needs to be funds that belongs to Bank A in Bank B in the local currency of that bank, so in pounds in this example. And that's known as nostro vostro. So nostro basically means our money that held in your account that belongs to us. So that's a nostro account. And vostro means, when you look at it from Bank B's point, is your money held in my account. So that's what they call it, nostro vostro. So here is another example now of banks with no direct relationships. So there's no direct accounts with each other, because these two banks had direct accounts with each other. Now imagine an example of USA, for example, and someone wants to send over $100 to a bank in Turkey, but in lira, and that's going to be equivalent to 1,000 lira, for example. But then Bank A, the USA bank, has no direct relationship with Bank B. They don't have no direct accounts with each other. So what that means is when the message is sent over via SWIFT, the only way to get it across is that they have to use middlemen. And these are known as correspondent banks. So they are intermediaries in the middle. So the message gets sent from Bank A to a correspondent bank. Then it may be passed on to another correspondent bank, and it may be passed on to another correspondent bank before eventually those two banks have an account with each other, and then the settlement occurs. Not because actual money is sent over, but each message that is sent from one bank to another just basically instructs the bank to do something. So the Bank A, when it sends over the message to this correspondent bank, it would instruct it to credit an account and debit an account. It sends over to this bank, credit an account, debit an account. It sends over to this bank, and the same thing. The message will be instructed to credit and debit an account. And then when it gets to here, it instructs the bank to, okay, pay that customer this and debit so and so. That's how they keep track of the balances by crediting and debiting. But again, it's imperative that for this to work, for payments to be sent from Bank A to Bank B via correspondent banks, is that each bank has to be pre-funded beforehand. So again, nostro vostro they call it, where Bank A has an account with this correspondent bank, and whatever the currency of that correspondent bank, it has to be pre-funded. So Bank A has to have a pre-funded account, and this correspondent bank has to have a pre-funded account with this correspondent bank. So that's how they deduct credit and debit along the way. And then this correspondent bank, they have to have bank accounts with each other. So when the message is sent across, the balance is already there, and they can just debit and credit the account from each bank. And then these two banks have accounts with each other already pre-funded. So this account has an account with this bank that's already in Turkish lira. So when the final message gets across, the customer receives his 1,000 lira, and the message just does the balancing. And that's what happens along the way. Now, with this system, as you can see, there's lots, it's a massive chain, and there's issues. And some of these issues are like slow settlement times. So that's why we have with the banking that we have today, it can take up to 2 to 5 days plus, especially with some currencies, especially if it's a corridor, for example, or a currency that there's not a lot of volume between the two banks going forth. So this is a bank where there's not much direct relationships with other banks. So you have to go through long chains of correspondent banks in order to finally get the message over for the settlement to occur. So this could take a long time depending on which currency you're converting over to. So or you're doing a cross-border payment to. So you can have slow settlements, 2 to 5 days. You can have high fees for the customer, because along each step there's fees that the customer has to pay. So the person who's sending their money over is responsible for the fees. And remember, there's currency conversions along the way as well. So it's high fees, and the person that's sending the money over is responsible for paying that fee. All banks in the chain have to be pre-funded in advance. Yep. So they have to be pre-funded in advance in multiple currencies for settlement. So it's important that the accounts are already pre-funded so that the accounting can happen of the crediting and debiting. So banks have to have each bank pre-funded in their local currencies, and that means there's going to be lots of capital tied up in nostro and vostro accounts. And another issue is that there's too much friction due to long transaction chains, and then there's checks along the way for compliancy, and also there's a potential for data corruption as well on the journey. And data corruption can occur as a result of different messaging formats between banks need translating, causing processing delays. So we have the SWIFT FIN-MT message. Now that may send over a message to a correspondent bank, but then that bank does not deal with the SWIFT FIN-MT message. They have their own sort of messaging format. So what they have to do, they have to translate the Swift MT message to their format that they use in their system and infrastructure, and then they send it over to another bank. And again, that bank may not recognize that format, but then they have to translate it to fit their system, their infrastructure. So different banks may have different messaging formats, and that needs translating along the way, and that can cause processing delays, which again leads to a slow settlement time, long delays, and that can also potentially lead to data corruption on the journey. So assume if there's data corruption along the journey, then the payment is unsuccessful and it doesn't go through. So that's how our legacy cross-border payment systems work without ISO 20022 standard. This is how it works today, how our systems are operating for cross-border payments. I'll do another video another time on XRP and ISO 20022 and how that's going to sort of improve this system that we have here. Okay, so this is the next video, and in this video I'm going to talk about cross-border payments, but this time using the ISO 20022 messaging standard. And I'm going to talk about it, hypothetically speaking, also if the banks were using XRP in this video. But in terms of ISO 20022 messaging standard, because I've been saying that a lot, and I'm saying it's going to go live in November in the Eurozone and in the UK in 2023, and I think in America 2023. But I think by 2025, Swift is going live with ISO 20022 as well in November this year, 2022. But by 2025, the idea is to have most of the banks, if not all the banks around the world, all on this standard. So they want to have a global standard, replacing the old messaging system, which was the thin MT messaging system, and they want to replace that with ISO 20022 and make it a global standard for international cross-border messaging. So now, what are the benefits of the ISO 20022 messaging system? Some of the benefits is that it's compatible messaging between countries and financial institutions. Because in the last video, one of the problems that they had was that different messaging formats are used by different banks. So this causes disruption when one bank has to translate the message before they can even use it, because it's not recognized by their system. So if they have a compatible messaging between countries and financial institutions, this should solve that problem. And this compatible international message is going to be ISO 20022. Another one is that what this messaging standard does is that it enables greater interoperability between different payment systems. And that's important and interesting because it now enables banks to use different payment systems, and that includes distributed ledger technology, DLT, which is basically they can tap into blockchain technology and payment systems as well as a result of adopting this messaging standard. And another benefit is that there's faster payment speeds and lower costs using the ISO 20022. I mean, there's probably a whole list of benefits, but this is just a summary and a simplified version. So if a bank was to use ISO 20022 and they were to use a different payment system, so we're going to go down to RTGS, and RTGS here stands for real-time gross settlement. And these are basically the infrastructures that banks use for cross-border payments. So you can see it's their payment system, that a bank would use for cross-border payments. So in the UK, our RTGS system is CHAPS. In America, they have FedWire and FedNow. In Europe, they have Target 2, Eurozone, and the ISO 2002022 compatible DLT RTGS system is Ripple. All of these payment systems are going to be ISO 2002022 compatible. So in effect, potentially they'll be interoperable with one another. So the CHAPS, for example, RTGS system in the UK, they can use potentially the Ripple DLT system for their cross-border payments. And that has benefits of its own. And I'm going to talk about that now on this diagram. So imagine a bank A in America, for example, and that bank has either fiat currency and a CBDC or CBDCs, and they want to send either one of them $100 worth, and their RTGS system in America, just say it's FedWire, for example. What FedWire can do is, instead of using FedWire, they can be interoperable and interface with another RTGS system, from my understanding and my research, because the ISO 2002022 messaging standard enables interoperability between different payment systems, and they can use, for example, in this example, Ripple, and they're going to use Ripple to send the payment across to bank B. So on one level, they have the payment messaging level, and this payment messages ISO 2002022, which is an MX. For the payment messaging system, the bank could use Swift, or they could use, in this case, Ripple as well, because Ripple does have the function of sending over payment messages along with settlement. But just say the bank is not going to use Ripple, it's going to use Swift to send over the message. So bank A uses Swift to send over the message to bank B, which is Turkish lira. And if you remember in my other video, this payment step involved lots of corridors, correspondent banks, intermediaries, because there was no direct relationship. Now, in this same example, there is no direct relationship between them. They don't have accounts with each other, but that doesn't matter because they're going to use the XRP RTGS system. So first, the bank sends over a payment message to bank B. Then the bank uses the RTGS, the Ripple RTGS, the Ripple blockchain, to make a direct corridor between the American bank and the bank in Turkish lira. And what it basically does is it converts the 100 USD, whether it's a fiat currency or CBDC, into XRP, and then XRP is sent across to the bank in Turkey, and then XRP is a bridge currency. It's converted into Turkish lira, and it's all done instantaneously, so it's an instantaneous settlement, and it can take about 1 to 2 seconds. And it's a direct corridor using XRP as a bridge asset, and this is the value proposition for XRP in cross-border payments, is that one, it's fast, it's low cost, there's no friction because there's no long chains, there's no correspondent banks, there's no middlemen, it cuts all that out. And another important thing, there's no pre-funding of Nostro-Vostro accounts, because in the previous system, every bank has to be pre-funded beforehand in their local currency for the account, for their settlement to take place. But in this system, no pre-funding is necessary because it's a direct payment using XRP as the bridge asset to convert dollars into lira, and it's done within 1 to 2 seconds. So there's no pre-funding of Nostro-Vostro accounts, there's no capital tied up by the banks, and it's on-demand liquidity. I'll do another video discussing that more, on-demand liquidity, but basically it's liquidity on demand. £100 is sent, and XRP converts that over to lira, and it does it on demand, and it has on-demand liquidity. So it's easily open payment corridors into new markets. And what this does is, using XRP RTGS system, is that you can have corridors into different markets, into like they call them like exotic corridors. It may be into countries that really don't have any connection with other international banks, because of no one wants to really hold their local currency, and you can then have a payment corridor with them, simply by using XRP, avoiding the whole correspondent bank issues, or maybe there is no corresponding banks for them because no currency wants to hold their currency for whatever reason. So you can just use XRP as a bridge asset and set up a direct payment system, using the XRP RTGS system. And because XRP is ISO 2022 compatible, their real-time gross settlement system is interoperable with other ISO 2022 payment systems. So the CHAPS UK system can potentially tap into the DLT benefits of XRP, FedWire, FedNow, Target 2 in Eurozone, and this is all possible because they're all converting over to ISO 2022. Now, does this mean that they're going to use XRP once they become ISO? No, it doesn't mean that. They could still continue with the old system and not use XRP. So if the XRP DLT, distributed ledger technology based real-time gross settlement system, isn't used, then what does that mean? Well, it still means that correspondent banks would be necessary if there's no direct relationship. So in this case, even if they were sending a message over with ISO, and because there's no direct relationships, and you're going to have correspondent banks in the middle, even if they all recognize the same message, you're going to have correspondent banks in the middle. Pre-funding of all banks in the chain is necessary for settlement. So that means there would have to be nostro vostro accounts, and then each correspondent bank has to be pre-funded in that local currency's currency. And that means it's going to be capital tied up again because of nostro vostro accounts. So even though the message can be sent using Swift in Swift, if they're not going to use Ripple for that instantaneous direct corridor, they're going to have to use correspondent banks. Now, the message may be sent over faster because all the banks are going to be likely moving over to ISO 2022, but that does not solve the problem of having pre-funding accounts. So accounts has to be pre-funded, and even though the message may be faster, it won't be as fast as using Ripple. Even though there may be low cost, it won't be as cheap as using Ripple because there's going to be correspondent banks in the middle and the cost would be more, whereas using Ripple would be cheaper. And even though there will be less friction because all the banks are using the same messaging standard, it won't be as Ripple where there's no friction at all because it's a direct corridor. Do you understand what I'm saying here? And what they would have to do if they're not using Ripple, even though they're using ISO, they will still have to pre-fund the accounts of each bank. But with Ripple, that is not necessary because the liquidity is on demand. So as and when you need liquidity, you can get that through the XRP ledger. Their corridor, their liquidity hub is on demand. Whereas if you're not using the Ripple RTGS and you're just doing it via another RTGS, such as CHAPS, in America it will be FedWire, for example, you're going to have the liquidity tied up in the correspondent banks along the way, and it has to be there in order for the accounts to be credited and debited. So that's the benefit of using XRP, the XRP RTGS system with the ISO 2022 messaging standard. So even though banks don't have to use XRP, they have the option to use XRP. But when you understand the value proposition of XRP and the problems that it's solving for these banks and how it gives instantaneous settlement and how it's so much better and superior, we are hoping that many banks would tap into XRP and use their RTGS system, even if it's for a percentage of their cross-border payments. Maybe they're going to, majority of their cross-border payments in the beginning would be off of XRP, but they would try it out because they can, because they're ISO compatible, so they're going to have interoperability with other payment systems like distributed ledger technologies, like XRP, for example, and they can tap into the XRP system and they can use their corridor for direct payments between banks, and a percentage of their cross-border payments can be through XRP, and maybe that percentage over time with different banks would increase. So this is why when I talk about ISO 2002022 going live, it's a big thing for the utility of XRP with banks and their RTGS system, their real-time gross settlement system. And as all these RTGS systems will be ISO interoperable, they're going to be ISO interoperable at different times, but once they all become on board, then they are all interoperable with the Ripple ledger, and the XRP ledger can connect to the bank's RTGS, or they can use the XRP RTGS instead of their RTGS to send payments over for instantaneous 1 to 2 second settlements, and it will just save them time, hassle, and they won't have to deal with nostro-vostro pre-funding. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so as to not miss my next video. Take care and goodbye.